Social media can unite and can divide us. And really, if you peruse social media, you can see division in all sorts of ways about, about topics that are very hot topics today, whether it be about racism, whether it be about politics, or if it be about sexuality or gender. There's some, and then a lot of times in our society today, you probably noticed this, is that they polarize everything. Like, you can't be anywhere in the middle. You got to be they either label you strong this way or strong the other way, right? And based on what you say, they decide which end of the spectrum you're on. You can't be anywhere in the middle and have some kind of like a rational middle ground. It's like you got to be one way or the other. Completely liberal or completely conservative. Or whatever they want to label those things as or define those things as. I mean, I would say, and I don't know if you believe this, but our country and our community and our nation and our city and our county needs unity badly. I mean, we need unity. I mean, there's so much unrest and there's so much tension between people that we need some type of unity. Well, the place that we should definitely have unity is the church, which is what we're going to be talking about today. In fact, we're going to be talking about unity in relationship with communion, because that's what communion is supposed to be. Communion is supposed to be the church displaying the unity that they have in Christ. So we need unity. And I believe that unity is built on respect, right? When we respect people, we have more unity. And we know we respect them whenever we value them. When we say, I respect you, what we're saying is that you're valuable, you matter, you have worth. And because you have worth and you matter, then you deserve respect. And the reason we would value someone is that we want to understand them. We want to better know them. We're not trying to just get our opinion out, because a lot of times that's what we do on social media. We don't read to understand. We don't ask questions to understand. A lot of times when we have conversations with people, we're not trying to listen to understand. We're trying to wait for the opportunity to interject what we have to say, instead of actively listening to understand somebody. So when we respect, we value. When we value, we seek to understand. How do we understand? Through active listening. And then we get a holistic perspective of someone. Because a lot of times what I think we see, the reason we get so upset at one another is because we want to categorize somebody so quickly by making assumptions about why we think they do what they do, or why they act the way that they act. And the result is that we have broken relationships, tension, and we attack each other a lot of times on false assumptions, because we really don't take the time to understand one another and to show concern and care for each other. So today we're talking about communion and how that should bring unity. This is also known as the Lord's Supper. I think one of the best images that represents communion is a loaf of bread. The loaf of bread, there are multiple types of bread. Raise your hand if I say a type of bread the way you like to enjoy bread. Toasted bread with jelly, jam, honey, cream cheese, or butter. If you like one of those things, raise your hand. All right, how about a sandwich or a sub made with bread? Whether it be a Publix sub or Jimmy John sub, okay? A lot of people like that. How many of you love a grilled cheese? If you like grilled cheese, raise your hand. Man, we love it when bread's like that. How many of you like what the DuBoses, or some people say my name, DuBose, the French people call French toast? How many of you like French toast? Raise your hand. That's some good stuff, man. Maybe with some powdered sugar and some syrup. All right. How many of you like garlic bread? Like whenever you're doing something Italian, you're like, man, I got to chow down on some garlic bread. Yep, I like some garlic bread. I like cheesy garlic bread. How many of you like the Italian pizza? How many of you like pizza? Raise your hand if you like that kind of bread. All right. That's some good stuff. How about the rolls with cinnamon butter from Texas Roadhouse? Woo, woo. Come on. Give me some of that. A lot of us like that kind of bread. I think the loaf of bread that's not cut up best represents communion, because you have unity. You have a whole piece. And then what we're going to see with the story with Jesus and how He institutes the Lord's Supper is that it breaks it and reminds us of His body. And then he also involves the cup of wine, and reminds us of Jesus' blood that he spilt. But I think too many times in church, like instead of thinking of maybe that brown loaf of bread at Outback, where you get the whole loaf and you got to slice it and then you put the butter on it and then you eat it. A lot of times we don't have bread like that. We act like ducks act when we throw out bread. Ever throwing out bread for ducks to eat? You throw a little slice of bread, they're like jumping all over each other, trying to get to the bread. It's like whoever can get there first. Sometimes in church, that's how we act. We act like that we're at Disney World, or we're at Universal, or Islands of Adventure, and we're driving out there on the road, and you're trying, I got to get first, I got to be in front, I got to be number one, I got to be the best, I got to get on this ride as fast as I can. I'm going to run over this little girl who's 3 years old that would love to get on this ride, but I'm going to get on the little spinny teacups before she does. Maybe we act like that as grown adults sometimes, right? And that should not be church. That should not be church. And it's exactly what Paul is talking about here in 1 Corinthians. But the church should be celebrating communion as a representative of our common unity. Because when we look at the body of Jesus that's broken, we are reminded that we are sinners. When we take the cup and we drink that juice, in Jesus' case, whenever he instituted the Lord's Supper wine, whenever they drink that, they are reminding themselves of the blood that was spilt because of our sin. We are all sinners. We have that commonality. And we also all have the commonality that we can't get to God except through Jesus. Not by good works, not by anything we could do, but through Jesus. And so, let's look at one verse, a couple verses where Paul starts out. 1 Corinthians 10:31 through 11:1. 1 Corinthians 10:31 through 11:1. I just want to read these real quick. He says, and you'll know these right off the bat. So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do everything for the glory of God. So to glorify God, to represent God well, to show the greatness of God. Well, how do you do that? He tells you in verse 32 of chapter 10 of 1 Corinthians. Give no offense to Jews or Greeks or the church of God. So he says, seek to not offend people. All right? Seek to not offend people. Verse 33, just as also I tried to please everyone and everything. Whoa! Now this should just fly in the face of a lot of things that have you ever said or ever heard someone say, you know what, I just don't care about what anybody thinks anymore. I'm going to do whatever the world I want to do. If I want to do it, I'm going to do it, and I don't care what they think. I mean, this is a regular philosophy that we use, right? I don't care what anyone thinks. I'm just going to do whatever I want to do. And Paul's saying, he says, I also tried to please everyone in everything. Like, goodness gracious, Paul, you're going to drive yourself crazy trying to please everybody. Why are you doing that? Well, he tells us why. He says, in everything, not seeking my own benefit, but the benefit of many. What he's trying to say is not he's trying to please everyone in every possible way. What he's saying is I'm trying to make sure that I'm caring for other people and not just caring for myself. It's not about me getting in line first at Wild Adventures, or me getting in line first at Universal, or me getting ahead first at the red light, or me getting this, or me getting that. I'm trying to get mine, and I could care less what you get. Paul's saying what he means by seeking to please everyone, he is seeking to benefit them. He is seeking to do good to them and not just look out for himself. Of course, you've got to take care of yourself to a certain degree, or you're not going to be any good to anyone. But whenever you're always coming in first and you're trying to make sure you come in first and not caring what everyone else thinks, he said that is not the church. That is not how the church acts. The church doesn't act this way. So he says he's not trying to please everyone. He's not seeking his own benefit, but the benefit of the many. And then he says, so that they may be saved. Yes, what you do and how you treat each other affects how they walk with Jesus. And so everybody in this room, we're all responsible for each other in our walk with Christ. And you can either drive people away from Jesus, or you can get them closer to Jesus by how you act, what you do, what you talk about. You can do that. And as Christ followers, people who are genuine Christ followers, we need to care about the person next to us. They need to matter to you. They should be valuable to you. And then he says, well, where do you get this, Paul, from? I mean, Paul, are you just pulling this out of the air? Where are you getting this idea about caring for others and making sure you care for others and not just look out for yourself? He says, imitate me also as I imitate Christ. Paul said, I'm getting this from Jesus. This is how he did it. And oftentimes what I see us doing sometimes is that, sometimes we try to get further away from Christ in how we do things. Maybe we try to lower Jesus' standard of doing what's good, but sometimes we get Pharisaical and we have higher expectations than what Jesus had. I think we go both ways. Sometimes we get Pharisaical and saying, you need to be up here before you talk to anybody about Jesus. That's not true. Woman at the well just blows that right out of the water. That girl just got saved. She was still known around town for living with a guy that's not even her husband. And she's taken off into town telling people about Jesus. So that blows that out of the water. While at the same time, Jesus does have expectations. So our big idea today is communion is a catalyst for community between believers and Christ. Communion is a catalyst between believers and Christ. It's a catalyst for community between believers and Christ. So we're going to answer a few questions. What is communion and how should we practice it? And talk a little about how to care what everyone thinks without losing your mind. We're going to try to talk a little bit about that too. So first of all, the church celebrates communion for transformation, unification, and proclamation. The church celebrates communion for transformation, unification, and proclamation. Transformation, unification, and proclamation. So he says in verse 17, now in giving this instruction, I do not praise you. Paul's saying, I can't brag about you guys. Y'all done messed up. I want to brag about it. I can't do it. Y'all done screwed this up. We got to get real. Y'all messed up. Then he says, since you come together, not for the better, for the worse. He said, when you guys get together as the church, y'all aren't getting better, you're getting worse. We need to talk about this. And we need to talk about why that's happening. Why are you getting worse and not better? And he says, for to begin with, I hear that when you come together as the church, there are divisions among you, and in part I believe it. He said, I believe that there's divisions among you to a certain degree. He said, I'm not believing everything, but I believe some of it. Indeed, it is necessary that there be factions among you. And we're looking at, sorry if I didn't tell you, chapter 11, looking at verses 17 through 27. 17 through 27. He says, indeed it is necessary, in verse 19, that there be factions among you, so that those who are approved may be recognized among you. Now he's saying that divisions is a bad thing, but then he talks about there's factions among you and it needs to be the case. What he's saying is that you need to see the differences between people to the degree of where they are with Jesus. Because we all should be concerned about where each other are with Jesus, right? Wouldn't it be horrible for something to come to Converge week after week after week and not be forgiven in Jesus for their sin? I don't want our youth group to be guilty of someone not being right with God, dying and meeting Him one day because we weren't getting in Jesus conversations with folks. That would be a horrible thing to be said about our youth group, right? We want to be talking to people about Jesus and asking them, where are you with Jesus? What is your next step with Jesus? But he said that there need to be facts. We need to understand that different people are in different places with Jesus. So that those who are approved may be recognized among you. And that's the transformation piece. Communion, because it is celebrated by Christ's followers and by those who are following Jesus, giving their lives to Jesus, it kind of gives us an idea whenever we're gathering together with a church, kind of where people are with Jesus, right? It gives us an idea about how we interact with each other, where we are with Jesus. God said that you can't say you love Him and hate your neighbor. He said if you say that, you're a liar. So when we're gathering with the church and we're supposed to have unity, and unity among the things that Jesus has commanded us to do, like communion, if we're not loving one another well, it gives us a pretty good idea of where we are with God. We're supposed to be loving one another, and if we're not, something's up between us and God. And the vice versa is true. If we say we love people, but we don't love God, we don't love people very much. Because we can't love them like God loves them if we're not loving God. So it helps us see where we need to transform. But also notice that communion is supposed to be resulting in unification. He says, when you come together, then it is not to eat the Lord's Supper. Why isn't it to eat the Lord's Supper? Even though they're saying this is Jesus' body, this is Jesus' blood as we drink this wine. Why isn't it the Lord's Supper, Paul? He says, for at the meal, because they were eating a meal along with us celebrating the Lord's Supper. And what was happening is that the folks who were well off, wealthy, were bringing a lot of food and a lot of wine. They were bringing a lot of food and a lot of wine, and they were going to eat this meal and drink. And there were also folks that were coming that were very poor and didn't have a whole lot. And what the rich folks were doing is they were chowing down on their food while their brothers and sisters in Christ, the poor folks, were going hungry. And they didn't care. Not only were they chowing down on their food and just enjoying their food while the poor folks were going hungry, but they were also getting drunk on their wine, while these guys didn't have anything else to drink. And what Paul's trying to say, it's obvious there's not unity here. It's obvious there's not loving your neighbor as yourself here. It's obvious that the mark of a disciple, where Jesus said that you should love one another, what He told His disciples to do, and this is how you will know that people will know that you're one of my disciples. It's not happening here. He's saying because you guys are just trying to outdo one another, and he'll get into this more throughout Corinthians, how they have different spiritual gifts, and some of them were saying, because I speak in tongues, I'm better than you, or because I teach from the stage, I'm better than you, and because I got this, I'm better than you. Like they were all trying to outdo one another. And part of the reason they were trying to outdo one another is because of the culture. The culture was very competitive. They had the Isthmian games there in Corinth. They're all about racing and competing and winning and trying to win the prize, cross the finish line first. And this was kind of spilling over into the church. We are very competitive, right, in our culture. I mean, we love FSU, we love Florida Gators, we love Miami Hurricanes, we love Alabama, we love, you just name whoever you go for, whoever you love. But it is not good that that spills into the church where we're just trying to outdo our brothers and sisters in Christ, and we enjoy it when they get hurt, and we like it whenever we get ahead of them, and we can say we're better than them. That is not church. That is not how the body of Christ loves one another. So it should result in unity. We should be caring about one another. There should never be a kid that comes in here and they don't have someone to sit with for dinner. There should be never a kid that comes in here and sits in these seats and doesn't have someone to sit next to them. There shouldn't ever be a kid that comes in there and feels like that they don't belong or they can't connect here. Because you know what you would do, right? If you came in here and you had no one to sit with, no one to eat with, no one to talk to, you would never come back here again. That's not church. That's not church. Same thing on Sunday morning. Same thing with how we act even outside when we're outside this campus. It should never be said of us that we were cool that this kid was sitting over there by themselves as we hung out with our friends. Because we just didn't want to take the time to do what Jesus would do, and that is reach out and connect with that person. Because guess what? They're valuable, they matter. Should never be said of us. But that's what was going on here in this church. And then finally, communion should be a proclamation. You see, when Jesus first instituted the Lord's Supper, communion, it was the night He was going to be arrested. And so they're celebrating the Passover meal. The Passover meal was a meal that was celebrated by the Jews to commemorate and to remember whenever God saved them out of slavery in Egypt. And so they were literally eating a meal whenever they were doing this. They were reclining at the table. They weren't sitting in chairs. They were reclining, most likely laying down next to a table. And Jesus took the bread and He broke it and He says, "This is my body that is given for you." And then He took the wine and He blessed it. And He says, "This is the blood of the new covenant that is spilled for you." And He says, "As often as you eat this bread and drink this cup, do this in remembrance of me." So we do it to remember what Jesus has done. They are symbols that Christ followers use to remind them about what Jesus has done for them. So this is not something that's celebrated by unbelievers. This is something that's celebrated by believers. Not by people who aren't Christ followers, but by people who are Christ followers. And that's an important distinction to make. Because what we're going to see in a minute, that if you take this in an unworthy manner, God says that there are some people that have gotten sick, gotten ill, and have died for taking this in an unworthy way. So this is not a light thing to take the Lord's Supper or to take communion. And what Jesus was doing is that even though this leavened bread that they were taking, I heard somebody say one time as we're eating the stale cracker or the crackers for the leavened bread, like, "Oh, this tastes bad." There's a reason for that. It doesn't taste that great because it's unleavened. meaning there's no yeast in there to make it rise. So it doesn't taste as good, But the reason it didn't have leaven in it is because the Jews had to leave Egypt in a hurry. They had to get out of there quick. And so they didn't have time to let the bread rise. And so Jesus is taking what was done back then and He's trying to tell them, this was pointing forward to what I was going to do. The body, that lamb that they slaughtered. They also ate lamb, at this meal. And they took that lamb, the blood from the lamb, and they poured it over the doorpost. So whenever the angel came through, or there's debates on, was it an angel, was it someone else? But the angel coming through and the firstborn was dying, the last plague that allowed them to be released from Egypt. They saw, whenever the angel saw that blood, the firstborn in that family didn't die. And the reason God was doing that is because it pointed forward to the blood that was going to be spilt by Jesus on our behalf so that we do not have to experience eternal death in hell. That's why Jesus did that. So Jesus is doing this. In the new covenant that Jesus is talking about here, that His blood is supposed to commemorate, it's a different kind of covenant, a covenant of grace. Back then, whenever they made covenants, it was made between a superior and an inferior. Meaning there was a superior person that made a covenant with an inferior person, and there was rules that were made. And they would agree to those rules. And if the person that was the inferior followed the rules, then they would be blessed in this covenant. But if they didn't follow the rules, there were curses, bad things that would happen for not following the rules, right? And then at the conclusion of this covenant, they would sacrifice an animal. So they would kill an animal. And in some circumstances, they would take the pieces of this animal and they would lay it basically in a row where both the parties can walk through it. And what this symbolized was, if you did not follow the rules of this covenant, how that animal looks is how you're going to look. You're going to be dead. So that's why they would do that. When Jesus died on the cross, and when we take communion, what it reminds us of is that that is what we deserve. When we look at the cross, we talked about this the other week. Emmeline talked about this last week. Romans 6:23. For the wages of sin is death. What you deserve and what I deserve is death. When we look at the cross, that's what we see. That's what we deserve. But what we also see is this is what God's provided. A way to be forgiven for sin. Because Jesus took our place there. That's why we celebrate communion. So it's to be unification, transformation, and the other one was, and I lost my place. The other one was proclamation. It's supposed to proclaim Jesus' death. But the last part, the church celebrates communion for transformation, unification, proclamation, and this is done through examination. This is done through examination. If you were to read the end of chapter 11 here, what he says is you need to examine yourself before you take communion. When we take it on Sunday morning and people go forward and they get the little juice and they get the little wafer, when we go, you need to examine yourself. One thing you need to examine yourself about is, are things right between you and other people? Or is there a problem between you and someone else? Because the Bible tells us at one point that if you go to make your gift, your offering at the altar, to give your offering of worship to God, and things are not right between you and someone else, go make them right, then come bring your offering back. Give your gift to God. You need to make sure things are right between you and other people. Because that's the chief issue here. They could care less about each other, and God says you're not really taking communion if you can care less about each other, because this is supposed to bring unity, not division. The other thing you need to examine yourself about, not just about are you right with other people, but the other thing he points out here is that you need to examine yourself to make sure that you are thinking about the right things whenever you're taking this wafer and this juice. Because if you're not doing it in remembrance of what Jesus has done for you, you are taking it in an unworthy manner. And he says here the result is sin, and that some people have fell ill and some people who have died because they took this in an unworthy way. So what should we do about this? If you're not a Christ follower, then you don't need to participate in the Lord's Supper. Don't do it. Okay? No one's going to look at you weird, think of you awkward, nothing like that. Whenever we're in the service on Sunday morning and we're taking the Lord's Supper, just don't go forward and don't take the wafer and the cup. It's fine. But you can still sit there and think about what Jesus has done as we're celebrating the Lord's Supper. The other thing is you need to look for the good in people. You need to do what's good for people. And you need to compliment people for the good that you see. That is how we're going to love each other well. Guys, I don't care how awful you would ever think about anybody. There is something good that you can see in someone if you wanted to see it. I think we often tend towards the negative and think about the worst of the worst of the worst. Oftentimes there is something really good in the people that are around you if you just have the eyes to see it and are willing to tell them about it. Finally, examine yourself. Make sure that you are reconciled to God, that you have given your life to Jesus, and that you're thinking about Jesus' death and resurrection when you go to participate in the Lord's Supper. So our big idea today is communion is a catalyst for community between believers and Christ.